Hello and welcome to Mrs. Riley's Maths videos. Today we're looking at percentages, and this is an introduction to percentages. We're going to go through 5 basic ideas. The first idea is what is a percentage. The second one is how to change a fraction to a percentage. The third one, how to change a decimal to a percentage. And then how to change a percentage to a fraction and how to change a percentage to a decimal. So those are the ideas we're going to look at today. The idea of percentage, as hopefully you know already, comes from this idea percent. Per meaning for, I think, and cent meaning 100. I'm not sure whether it's Latin or French, but basically it means for every 100. And a percentage is just a way of writing a fraction where the denominator, the dividing number, is 100. So instead of writing 42 over 100, we write 42%. Or instead of writing 33 over 100, we write 33%. Or instead of writing, let's say, 1 over 100, we write 1%. So that's what a percentage is. It's a way of writing a fraction where every fraction is divided up into 100 parts. So what about the first thing, to change a fraction to a percentage? To change a fraction to a percentage. Now some of these fractions you'll already know what they are as percentages. Hopefully you already know that 1/2 is what? Very good, it's 50%. You might even know that 1/3 is 33 1/3%. Why don't you try and write these ones down, pause the video and see if you know what percentages these different fractions are. Okay, so a quarter hopefully you knew was 25%, 1/5 is 20%, 1/10 is 10%, and 1/20 is 5%. Perhaps you didn't know that 1/20 one. How would we find out what 1/20 is a percent if we didn't know it? So one way of doing it is to say 1/20. If I write that as so many hundreds, because remember we said a percentage is just a fraction where the denominator is 100. What's 1/20 as something over 100? Well, how did I get from 20 to 100? I multiplied by 5. How do I get from 1 to over here? I multiply by 5. So it's 5 over 100, which is 5%. Okay, let's take another one. Say we had 4 over 9. That's a more difficult one. How would I get from 4 over 9 to a percentage? It's not easy to see what that is over 100, is it? I can't say, well, 9 goes into 100 11.1 times. Well, I could, but it's not really very helpful. So is there another way of doing it? Well, what I could do is I could divide 9 into 4. I could divide 9 into 4 and I could say, well, that would be changing it to a decimal first of all, wouldn't it? So maybe, is there another way? Because we'll come back to that when we change to decimals. How about if we said to get from 4/9 to a percentage, we'd multiply by 100. Okay, so to change a fraction to a percentage, you multiply by 100. And that's our key rule. Okay, 4/9 by 100 would give me 400 over 9. And 9 goes into 400. 9 goes into 400, goes into 44 times remainder 4 goes into 40. Oh dear, here we are, 4 times remainder 4. It's a recurring number, isn't it? So 4/9 is 44.4%. Let's try another one. How about 1/8? To change 1/8 into a percentage, I multiply by 100. And I have 100, because remember fractions top by top, bottom by bottom, so I have 100 over 8. If I divide 8 into 100, I get 8 goes into 10 once, remainder 2 goes into 20 twice, remainder 4 goes in 5 times. And I make sure my decimal point is in the right place, so it's 12.5%. Okay, so if we had a half, how would that have worked with our new rule? Well, then I'd have had 100 over 2, which is 50%. Why don't you try this one? What would 2/3 be as a percentage? Even if you know it, try and work it out the new way. Okay, so what did you do? Hopefully you said 2/3 times 100, which is 200 over 3, and then you divided 3 into 200, and you got 6 times remainder 2. Oh, here we have another one of these recurring decimals. So 66.6 recurring percent. Or you might have decided it was 66 remainder 2. 66 2/3%. Okay, how do we change a decimal to a percentage? It's much easier, you'll be glad to know, to change a decimal to a percentage. Well, again, let's take some of our decimals that we know already. We know that a half is 0.5. So 0.5 is a half, and we know that a half is 50%. We know that 0.25 is a quarter, and we know that a quarter is 25%. Hopefully you can see a pattern here. Here's another one. 0.4 is 4/10, and 4/10 we know is 40%. Hopefully you can see that what's happening is that we're moving this decimal point. 0.5 became 50%. The decimal point moved 2 spaces, didn't it? Okay, so any time to change a decimal to a percent, we move the decimal point 2 places that way, to the right. Okay, so that's quite easy, isn't it? So say we had 0.63, that would be moving it 1, 2 would give me 63%. Why are we moving it 2 places to the right? Well, actually we're moving it 2 places to the right because we're multiplying by 100. And why is that? It's because we know that 0.63 is 63 over 100. And to use our rule from up here, we know that anything over 100 is already a percent. And to find out how to write it, if it wasn't over 100, we'd multiply by 100. So actually it's the same rule. To change a decimal to a percentage, we multiply the decimal by 100. So there's our rule, has popped up twice, this idea of multiplying by 100. Now let's look about how do we change a percentage to a fraction. Okay, I think you probably know this now. Okay, so to change a percentage to a fraction. So we've already said that a percentage, like 50%, can be written as a fraction with the denominator being 100. So already we've changed 50% to a fraction by writing it as 50 over 100. But hopefully you know what I mean when I say simplify, or in its simplest form. 50 over 100 in its simplest form, I can divide above and below by 10, which would give me 5 over 10. And then I can divide that by 5, above and below by 5, which would give me 1 over 2. Now you probably knew that 50% was a half, but you can see how we started off by writing it over 100, and then we did what's called simplifying it. We wrote it in its simplest form, or we also, as a word that we use, is reduced it. Let's take 30%. How would we change that to a fraction? 30% is 30 over 100. If I divide by 10 above and below, I've got 3 over 10, and that's its simplest form. How about something like 28 over 100? Well, what could I divide 28%, that is, of course, 28 over 100. I could divide both sides by 2, and I'd get 14 over 50. I could divide by 2 again, and I'd get 7 over 25. So really this is an exercise in simplifying fractions. The issue with changing percentages to a fraction is that we write as over 100. Okay, so you write it as whatever the fraction is over 100. And finally, changing a percentage to a decimal, okay, well, it's a similar thing. So let's say change a percentage to a decimal. 32%, okay, is 32 over 100. And 32 over 100 means 32 divided by 100. And when we divide by 100, we move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So 32 divided by 100, 32, put in the decimal point there, divided by 100 is 1, 2. So we end up with the decimal before the 3. Let's take another one. 74% is 74 over 100, which is 74 divided by 100, which would be 0.74. So that's probably the easiest one, isn't it? To change a percentage to a decimal. What we're doing is we're dividing by 100. Okay, and what that means is we move the decimal point 2 places that way. Okay, now if we have something weird, say like 2.5%, and we want to change it to a decimal, you just have to remember that we're going to move it 2 places, 1, 2. We've got to put a 0 in there, don't we, to make sure. No, I did too many zeros there, didn't I? I'm going to put a 0 in there, so it's going to be 0.25, 0.025. So 2.5% as a decimal is 0.025. I hope that helps.